Good day, everyone, and welcome to another lesson here in mythology and folklore. For today's lesson, we're about to discuss the story of Hercules and his 12 labors. But before we start our lesson, let me show you our objectives for today. Objectives. At the end of the lesson, 100% of the students with 85 level of proficiency shall be able to: Number 1. Explain the myths and folklore stories and reflect the culture of a particular place and experiences. Second, be aware of the value of myths and folklore in a culture of a place. Lastly, recognize political concepts in Roman and Greek legends. Now, let's begin our lesson for today. The history of the story. The Hercules and the 12 Labors are a series of episodes concerning a penance carried out by Heracles, the greatest of the Greek heroes, whose name was later Romanized as Hercules. They were accomplished at the service of King Eurystheus. The episodes were later connected by a continuous narrative. The establishment of a fixed cycle of 12 labors was attributed by the Greeks to an epic poem, now lost, written by Peisander, dated about 600 BC. After Heracles killed his wife and children, he went to the oracle at Delphi. He prayed to the god Apollo for guidance. Heracles was told to serve the king of Mycenae, Eurystheus, for 10 years. During this time, he is sent to perform a series of difficult feats called labors. Hercules is one of the best known heroes in Greek and Roman mythology. His life was not easy. He endured many trials and completed many daunting tasks. But the reward for his suffering was a promise that he would live forever among the gods at Mount Olympus. For our second topic in this lesson, the early life of Hercules. Hercules had a complicated family tree. According to the legend, his father was Zeus, ruler of all the gods on Mount Olympus and all the mortals on earth, and his mother was Alcmene, the granddaughter of the hero Perseus. Did you know? The constellation Hercules is the fifth largest one in the sky. Hercules had enemies even before he was born. When Zeus's wife, Hera, heard that her husband's mistress was pregnant, she flew into a jealous rage. First, she used her supernatural powers to prevent the baby Hercules from becoming the ruler of Mycenae. Though Zeus had declared that his son would inherit the Mycenaean kingdom, Hera's meddling meant that another baby boy, the feeble Eurystheus, became its leader instead. Then, after Hercules was born, Hera sent two snakes to kill him in his crib. The infant Hercules was unusually strong and fearless. However, and he strangled the snakes before they could strangle him. But Hera kept up her dirty tricks. When her stepson was a young adult, She cast a kind of spell on him that drove him temporarily insane and caused him to murder his beloved wife and their 2 children. Guilty and heartbroken, Hercules tracked down Apollo, the god of truth and healing, and begged to be punished for what he had done. Apollo understood that Hercules' crime had not been his fault. Hera's vengeful actions were no secret, but still he insisted that the young man make amends. He ordered Hercules to perform 12 heroic labors for the Mycenaean king Eurystheus. Once Hercules completed every one of the 12 labors, Apollo declared he would be absolved of his guilt and achieve immortality. Here are the 12 labors performed by Hercules. To further understand the story, I have prepared a short video about the 12 labors of Hercules. Here is the part 1.
Myths are not stories that are untrue. Rather, they are tales that don't fit neatly into the historical record, which serve as a foundation to a culture. Blood. So much blood. Heracles awoke from the madness that had descended on him, only to see his hands red and slick, his body covered, and the walls of his house splashed with the blood of his family. In a fit of rage, which Hera, the jealous wife of Zeus, had cast upon him, he had slaughtered everyone he loved and held dear. So Heracles traveled to Delphi to ask how he might atone for his sin, and he was told to go to his cousin, King Eurystheus, and for 12 years complete whatever tasks he might ask. If he could achieve all that was asked of him, he would be redeemed in the eyes of the gods. Simple, right? Well, Eurystheus then laid out the 10 tasks for him. 1. Slay the Nemean lion. 2. Vanquish the 9-headed Lenaean hydra. 3. Capture the golden hind of Artemis. 4. Subdue the great Erymanthian boar and return with it alive. 5. Clean the Aegean stables in a single day. 6. Get rid of the man-eating birds of Stymphalia. 7. Capture the father of the Minotaur, the Cretan bull. 8. Steal the horse of Diomedes. 9. Obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. And finally 10. Procure the cattle of the giant Geryon. Now, all of these are basically impossible, but who's going to let a little thing like that stop them? Certainly not Heracles. So he immediately set off, heading high into the mountains of Nemea, tracking the lion. He carried with him his sturdy bow and quiver of arrows. But as he passed an olive tree, he had a great hero thought. TM. I'm not nearly armed to the teeth enough, and you know what that tree would be good for? Hitting things. Ha ha! I should rip it out of the ground and hit things with it. And so he did. Then, once he was done deforesting the mountainside, he spied the lion, jaws dripping with the remains of its last kill. He ducked down into a thicket, and as the beast passed, he loosed arrow after arrow into its tawny hide. But rather than sink deep, they merely bounced off as though they had struck the stone of the mountain itself. The beast, now noticing Heracles, turned to him and sprung. But as it leapt, he struck it with the great olive tree club, struck it with such a blow that only a child of Zeus could make. Dazed, the lion fled back to its lair, but Heracles blocked its only escape. Casting aside his bow, he threw himself upon it, and with his bare hands, choked the creature to death. He then took his knife and tried to skin it, but no matter how sharp he made his blade, it simply wouldn't pierce the creature's impervious skin. After trying this for a while, Athena at last put in his mind the idea of using the lion's own claws against it, and thus did he flay the lion and take its hide to wear as armor. You know what, just to keep track, I'll write all this stuff on his character sheet. Okay, +1 lion hide armor, and tree club of smacking. Great, loot accounted for. Where were we? Oh, right. With the first task done, he set off with his nephew and charioteer, Iolaus, to hunt the second beast, the great hydra whose heads are immortal and whose mouths drip the deadliest venom. As they approached the swamp where it was said to live, they saw the devastation it had wrought. Fields were barren, and the people who it had not consumed hid, huddling in their houses. Then, high on a hill, they found the monster's lair. and Hercules sprang from his chariot, launching arrows of fire at the scaly beast. Its 9 heads rose up, swaying and hissing, but the fire drove it back. At last, Hercules rushed the great serpent and pinned him with his bare arms. Then one by one, he hacked off the heads, but for each one he severed, 2 grew in its place. Hail Hydra. To make matters worse, it was all like, "Oh, you got a sidekick? Well, I got a sidekick too." Except, that was probably in all hisses. And a giant crab rose out of the swamp to start pinching Hercules as well. But it proved merely a distraction, because he crab punted it out of the stratosphere, and it actually became the constellation Cancer. But then, Hercules was all like, "Oh yeah? Well, my sidekicks got sick burns!" Cueing Iolaus to use burning brands and cauterize the serpent's necks as Hercules severed each head. At last, the serpent lay slain at their feet. Then, seeing an opportunity for a sweet buff, Hercules dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, rendering them deadly to any they even scratched. Okay, so poison arrows also added. Resourceful player, this one. The next task, though, would take a completely different set of skills. For he was to catch, not kill, the golden-horned and iron-hooved hind of Artemis. For a year he chased it, until, at last, it lay down in exhaustion. But just as he was about to seize it, it got up and made one more dash, and seeing that it was about to escape, Hercules loosed an arrow and wounded it grievously. Then, as he trusted to take back, Artemis herself appeared before him in wrath. But Hercules, you see, simply explained his penance set out to him by the gods, and then Artemis healed the hind and let him take it with him. AKA, he rolled a nat 20 on persuasion. Next, he had to subdue the great and terrible boar that had been terrorizing the Erymanthian countryside. But on the way, he stopped at the house of Pholos the centaur. Pholos welcomed him in and offered him food. But then Hercules asked if he could have something to drink too, because if you give a Hercules a cookie, you get the idea. Pholos told him that he did have one great vessel of wine, given by Dionysus himself, but sadly, it was joint property of all of the centaurs, and he feared to open it without them. But Hercules convinced him to break the seal. No sooner was this done than the other centaurs smelled the fumes of the precious wine and came racing towards Pholos's house. Then 2 of them, enraged, charged through the front door. Hercules grabbed flaming logs from the fireplace and hurled them at the attackers, driving them back. Then he grabbed his bow and charged them, loosing arrows at centaurs as he went. An arrow had pierced through one of the centaurs he was chasing, and it hit Heracles' friend, Chiron, the wisest of the centaurs, in the knee. Chiron cried out, for the Hydra's venom made the wound fatal. Heracles raced over to aid his old friend, but no healing, not even the healing Chiron himself had taught him, was to any avail. However, Chiron was immortal, so the wound, though fatal to any mortal being, simply left him in perpetual agony. So at this point, Heracles could only do one thing for his old friend, promise to one day find a way for him to die. Then Heracles continued on his hunt. He drove the great boar into a snowfield, and when it exhausted itself deep in the bank of snow, he threw a net over it and captured it alive. Though unfortunately, while he was doing this, Pholos had drawn one of the arrows out of a dead centaur, curious how such a small weapon could wreak such harm. And in doing so, it slipped through his clumsy fingers and pierced his foot, killing him instantly. So in other words, he got distracted drinking with friends and then left a bunch of non-boar related collateral damage in his heroic wake. Now we're really starting to feel like an RPG. Up next was the task to clean the great stables of Aegeus, the man who owned the most cattle in all of Greece. When Heracles presented himself, he boasted to Aegeus that he could clean his stable in a day. And Aegeus, not knowing who he was talking to, laughed to himself and then offered Heracles a tenth of his herd if he could pull off such a feat, knowing full well that it was impossible. But when he went to watch Heracles work, rather than picking up a shovel, he saw Heracles rip up the very foundation of his stable, then divert 2 rivers to flow through it. And so in a night, his stable was clean, though not exactly in the state he desired. Of course, there was a big court case about this, the upshot of which being that Heracles got paid in cows, but Aegeus exiled his own son for being a snitch. Okay, so that's plus 200 cattle. Would I put that under inventory or currency in ancient Greece? Oh, sorry. You know what? Character sheet updates can take forever. So I'll work on this until next time, when Heracles goes for the next 5 labors, and maybe even a few bonus ones. Fat loot for days. Legendary thanks to patrons Ahmed Ziad Turk and Kyle Murgatroyd.
Now, for the part 2 of the story. Here it goes.
Myths are not stories that are untrue. Rather, they are tales that don't fit neatly into the historical record, which serve as a foundation to a culture. 5 tasks down, 5 tasks to go. But you may be asking yourself, isn't this series called the 12 Labors of Hercules? Oh, it is, and your math isn't wrong. So find out how it all shakes out on this episode of When we left Hercules last week, he had just diverted some rivers to clean a stable. But now he was on to more heroic work, beating up birds. Specifically, labor number 6, getting rid of the stymphalides, monstrous birds with iron feathers and razor claws, who could fling their feathers like arrows. Heracles had no idea how he could possibly chase off so many. But then Athena came to him and handed him a pair of bronze castanets. He went high up on a hill and began to make a terrible racket with the clackers, and the startled birds took flight. He fired his bow after them as they flew, and they never again returned to the troubled area. And he definitely kept those castanets, so I'll just write him here on the old character sheet. And, has he leveled up? I mean, he's been cleaning stables and scaring birds. I'll just bump him up one, and we'll figure out his feats later. Okay, onward. With only 4 tasks to go, he headed off for Minos, where the king had offered Poseidon a sacrifice of whatever animal first came out of the sea. But when a beautiful bull walked out of the waves, the king thought he could trick Poseidon by hiding it in his flock. Needless to say, this did not go well, and the bull was now rampaging all over the island. But an angry bull was nothing to Heracles, who just wrestled it to the ground and packed it up to go. That was a fast one. So then it was on to the man-eating horses of Diomedes. The wicked king of the Bistonians had been feeding people to his horses, so Heracles gathered up a posse and rode off to take him out. He and his band overpowered the guards at the stables and broke the great bronze chains holding the horses. But just as they were about to get away to their ships, a great force of Bistonians fell upon them. Heracles handed the horses to a young man and set about with his mighty club, crushing the troops that intercepted them. Now, unfortunately, in the time that took, the horses ate the young man. But, at least that made him calm enough to round up. Now on to the 9th labor, which should have gone smoothly. For Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, was impressed by Heracles and his band. She was ready to give him her sword belt as a gift, the very object he was searching for. But vengeful Hera, disguised as an Amazon, told the Amazon warriors that Heracles was going to kidnap their queen. So they rushed to fight him and gave him his most grievous battle yet. Many fell on both sides, until at last, Hippolyta offered the belt for peace, something she was planning on giving him anyway. Amazonian misunderstandings concluded, this just left the cattle of the giant Geryon, a monster with 3 heads, 3 bodies, 6 arms, and 6 legs. Geryon was at the edge of the world, so far away, Eurystheus figured even if Heracles somehow managed all the other challenges, he'd never get to Geryon in time. But as Heracles crossed the Libyan desert, he became so infuriated by the heat that he loosed an arrow at the sun, which inadvertently got the attention of Helios, and admiring his courage, lent Heracles the chariot he used to cross the sky every day. And so in one night, Heracles and his companions got to the land of Geryon. To celebrate his arrival, Heracles cleft a great mountain in 2, creating the Pillars of Heracles, or what we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. But in doing so, you could say his arrival didn't exactly go unnoticed. Geryon's 2-headed dog raced out and attacked Heracles, who dispatched it with a stroke of his club. Then Geryon's servants rushed to take him on, but that ended with the same result. Finally, Geryon himself came, but Heracles downed him with one of his hydra-poisoned arrows and made away with his cattle. At last, his labors done, Heracles returned to the court of Eurystheus, who, just for the record, is conveniently hiding in a pot buried halfway in the ground, because now he's afraid of Heracles due to this guy actually doing all of the ludicrous things he sent him out to do. But Heracles found him, and as he recounted his adventures, and Eurystheus is ticking them off of the quest log, he stops him and asks Heracles to repeat what he'd just said about the Hydra and the stables. Then, popping his face over the rim of the pot, he shakes his head and says that the Hydra didn't count since Heracles had help, and the stables didn't count because he'd cleaned them for pay. So now, to make amends, he's gotta do 2 more tasks. Steal the apples of the Hesperides and capture Cerberus, guardian of the underworld. Disappointing for Hercules, but pretty good for us since we put the number 12 in these episode titles. Both new labors, of course, were impossible tasks, ones Hercules couldn't possibly succeed in. After all, the apples lay in the garden where the nymphs of the west danced, and who knew where that was? Not to mention, the apples themselves could only be retrieved by a relation of the Hesperides, which for all of Heracles' divine blood, he was not. And even if he could do that, going down to Hades afterward isn't really a picnic. But determined to fulfill the oracle, Heracles began to wander searching for news of the garden. So, he wandered into the mountains, and then it was side quest time! So this is going to be a callback from an episode a while ago, but get this. Heracles encountered Prometheus chained to the rock. So he was all like, "Yo, Daddy Zeus! I'll trade you Chiron's immortality if you'll free Prometheus." And his boss dad responded, "All right, son, good deal." And so he fulfilled his promise to Chiron to find some way for him to die, and also freed Prometheus, who then told him how to get to the garden. You know what? That was pretty clutch. I'm gonna give him a point of inspiration for that one. So side quest complete, Heracles continued his journey, and eventually saw a strange figure holding up the sky. It was Atlas. Knowing that Atlas was related to the Hesperides, Heracles made him an offer. He would hold up the sky if Atlas would go pick him some apples. Atlas, super pumped, did just that. But then decided he didn't really want to keep holding up the heavens for all of eternity. So he said, you know what? He would just go deliver the apples, while Heracles kept holding up the sky. But Heracles, quick-witted as he was strong, said, "Sure, sounds great, but let me just adjust my cloak a little bit, so that it can better pad my shoulders." One deception check later, Heracles handed the sky back to Atlas, and then he ran off with the apples, leaving Atlas stuck to keep holding up the firmament. This now left only the last and most terrifying task, capturing the very guardian of hell. To prepare for this, Heracles went to some priests and asked them for their knowledge of the underworld. And then with that knowledge, and guided by Hermes, he climbed down a great cleft in the earth, to the realm from which few come back. And at last, he stood before Hades himself, and requested that he might, borrow his dog? Hades, amused by this, said he totally could, if he could simply master the beast without the use of weapons or metal armor. Alright, just gonna erase that for a second. So Heracles faced the 3-headed, dragon-tailed, snake-backed guardian of the underworld, with nothing but his cloak for a shield. The dog lashed with its tail, but Heracles parried with the lion's skin, which was impenetrable but also not metal, so super legal. He got closer. The jaw snapped at him, but again rules lawyering pretty hard, blocked it with the lion hide. Then at last, he was close enough, and sprang upon the monster and pinned it to the ground until it was subdued, leading it away on a great chain, and thus completing the 12 labors of Heracles. Oh, good call, Zoe. Now that we've maxed out Heracles, we can totally play the Argonauts module. Ooh, I call dibs on Orpheus or Hulk if we're playing the Avengers mod. Legendary thanks to patrons Ahmed Ziad Turk and Kyle Murgatroyd.
For our third topic, the 12 labors. The goddess Hera, determined to make trouble for Hercules, made him lose his mind. In a confused and angry state, he killed his own wife and children. When he awakened from his temporary insanity, Hercules was shocked and upset by what he had done. He prayed to the god Apollo for guidance, and the god's oracle told him he would have to serve Eurystheus, the king of Tiryns and Mycenae, for 12 years, in punishment for the murders. As part of his sentence, Hercules had to perform 12 labors, feats so difficult that they seemed impossible. Fortunately, Hercules had the help of Hermes and Athena, sympathetic deities who showed up when he really needed help. By the end of these labors, Hercules was, without a doubt, the Greece's greatest hero. His struggles made Hercules the perfect embodiment of an idea the Greeks called pathos, the experience of virtuous struggle and suffering which would lead to fame and, in Hercules' case, immortality. The first labor, the Nemean lion. Juno sends a lion to eat the people of Nemea. The lion's hide is so protected that no arrow can pierce it. Knowing that he cannot kill the animal with his bow, Hercules meets the lion and strangles it with his bare hands. Thereafter, he wears the lion's skin as a protection when he fights, for nothing can penetrate it. The second labor, the Lernaean Hydra. Hercules has to meet the Lernaean Hydra. This creature lives in a swamp, and the odor of its body kills all who breathe the fetid fumes. Hercules begins the battle, but discovers that for every head he severs from the monster, two more appear. Finally, he obtains a flaming brand from a friend and burns each stump as he severs each head. When he comes to the ninth and invulnerable head, he cuts it off and buries it under a rock. Then he dips his arrows into the body of the Hydra so that he will possess more deadly weapons for use in future conflicts. The third labor, the Cernaean hind. For the third labor, they found a task which they thought would spell doom for the hero. It was not slaying a beast or monster, as it had already been established that Heracles could overcome even the most fearsome opponents. Instead, Eurystheus ordered him to capture the Cernaean hind, which was so fast that it could outrun an arrow. The fourth labor, the Erymanthean boar. Hercules captures the Erymanthean boar and brings it back on his shoulders. The sight of the wild beast frightens Eurystheus so much that he hides in a large jar. With a fine sense of humor, the hero deposits the captured boar in the same jar. While on this trip, Hercules incurs the wrath of the centaurs by drinking wine they claimed for their own. To escape from them, he has to kill most of the half-horse men. The fifth labor, the Augean stables. The fifth labor was to clean the stables of King Augeas. This assignment was intended to be both humiliating and impossible, since these divine livestock were immortal and had produced an enormous quantity of dung. The Augean stables had not been cleaned in over 30 years, and over 1,000 cattle lived there. However, Heracles succeeded by rerouting the rivers Alpheus and Peneus to wash out the filth. The sixth labor, the Stymphalian birds. These Stymphalian birds are carnivorous. Hercules alarms them with a bell, shoots many of them with his arrows, and causes the rest to fly away. The seventh labor, the Cretan bull. Neptune gives a sacred bull to Minos, the king of Crete. Minos' wife, Pasiphae, falls in love with the animal and pursues it around the island. Hercules overcomes the bull and takes it back to Eurystheus by making it swim the sea while he rides upon its back. The eighth labor, the mares of Diomedes. Like the Stymphalian birds, the mares of Diomedes feed on human flesh. Usually, Diomedes finds food for them by feeding to them all travelers who land on his shores. Diomedes tries to prevent Hercules from driving away his herd. He is killed and his body fed to his own beasts. The ninth labor, the belt of Hippolyta. Admeta, Eurystheus' daughter, persuades her father to send Hercules for the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. The Amazon queen is willing to give up her girdle, but Juno interferes by telling the other Amazons that Hercules plans to kidnap their queen. In the battle that follows, Hercules kills Hippolyta and takes the girdle from her dead body. The tenth labor, the cattle of Geryon. Geryoneus, a three-bodied, three-headed, six-legged, winged monster, possesses a herd of oxen. Ordered to bring the animals to Eurystheus, Hercules travels beyond the Pillars of Hercules, now Gibraltar. He kills a two-headed shepherd dog and a giant herdsman, and finally slays Geryoneus. He loads the oxen on a boat and sends them to Eurystheus. Returning on foot across the Alps, he has many adventures on the way, including a fight with giants in the Philgrian fields near the present site of Naples. The 11th labor, the golden apples of Hesperides. For this task is to obtain the golden apples in the garden of Hesperides. No one knows where the garden is, and Hercules sets out to roam until he finds it. In his travels, he kills a giant and a host of pygmies, and he burns alive some of his captors in Egypt. In India, he sets Prometheus free. At last, when he discovers Atlas holding up the sky, Hercules assumes this task, releasing Atlas to go after the apples. Atlas returns with the apples and reluctantly takes up his burden again. Hercules brings the apples safely to Eurystheus. The last labor, Cerberus. This is the most difficult labor of all. After many adventures, he brings the three-headed dog Cerberus from the underworld. He is forced to carry this struggling animal in his arms because he is forbidden to use weapons of any kind. Afterward, he takes Cerberus back to the king of the underworld. That ends the labors of this mighty ancient hero. For our next one, the setting of the story. Places where the story happened. The stories of Heracles take place way back in the day. By the time writers started scribbling their versions of Heracles' adventures, the stories of his exploits had already been around for many years. Some call the era of Heracles and his fellow heroes the Heroic Age, the time when the heroes were all direct descendants of the gods and the world was crawling with monsters that needed slaying. It's important to think about the fact that even to the writers who originally recorded the legends of Heracles, he was a figure from the distant past. Let's move on to the characters in the story. Hercules. Hercules is the son of Jupiter and the mortal Alcmene. In classical mythology, Hercules is famous for his strength and for his numerous far-ranging adventures. Hera. Hera, queen of the gods, was Zeus's wife and the patron of marriage. She greatly affected the course of Hercules' life. She hated the hero so much that she caused him problems at every opportunity. Eurystheus. He is Hercules' cousin and king of Mycenae and Tiryns. Next is Megara. In Greek mythology, Megara was a Theban princess and the first wife of the hero Heracles. Iolaus. He was famed for being Heracles' nephew and for helping with some of his labors, and also for being one of the Argonauts. Next is Atlas. In Greek mythology, Atlas is a titan condemned to hold up the celestial heavens or sky for eternity after the Titanomachy. Atlas also plays a role in the myths of two of the greatest Greek heroes, Hercules and Perseus. For our next topic, the themes in the story. Our first theme is jealousy. The jealousy of Hera, queen of the gods, is the biggest source of conflict for Heracles' entire life. As one of Zeus's many illegitimate children, Heracles is a constant reminder for Hera of her husband's infidelity. Next is determination. No doubt that determination is the key to success. If an individual gives up in the middle, it is impossible for that person to accomplish anything. Determination is also a key quality that a hero must have. Our last theme is courage and strength. Courage and strength are the main qualities of Hercules. In the first labor, his courageous is being demonstrated clearly. When Hercules is told to go kill the vigorous lion, he shows no fear. His courageous quality is also demonstrated when he decides to kill the lion with nothing but his hands. And for our last topic, symbolism in the story. The dumbbell. This symbol represents Heracles, the protagonist and hero of the story. It symbolizes Heracles' strength, which he abuses during the introduction of the story before his quest. But when he begins his journey, he must learn to channel and control the temper that comes with his strength. The lightning bolt. This symbol represents Zeus, the creator, father of our hero in the myth. Zeus was also the king of the gods, god of the lightning, and husband of Hera. The collar. This item symbolizes Cerberus, a beast dog from the underworld, and Hades' best guard dog. Heracles' final task to complete was to bring back Cerberus to Eurystheus, which was the supreme ordeal of this myth. And that's it for our today's lesson. I hope that you gained more knowledge from our topic today. Thank you for listening.